got 55 minutes. This is like an hour and 15-minute kind of presentation. So we're going to have to get... This is Super Verbs in the Sweet 16. And my name is Scott Benedict. And let me just give, for some of you who don't know me, who am I? That's really bright on the screen. It's not usually that bright. My name is Scott Benedict. And I've been teaching with comprehensible input since 2001, actually my second semester of teaching I started. Otherwise I would have quit. I would not have been here without it. I was a really boring regular teacher. I couldn't keep myself awake, so it was really hard to keep the kids awake for that first semester. And if I didn't find something else, I was going to quit. I could not consider myself doing this. So I've been doing it for now, going on my 18th year. I've taught high school for 12 years, and I never thought that I would make the transition over to Hormone High. But that is where I am, and I've been for the past 6 years. So yes, I'm in the Hormone High. The 8th graders they're just younger freshmen. There's not much of a difference. 7th graders, still not much of a difference, but I did 6th grade once. That was scary. They terrified me. They're 10. The first day, the kid goes, "Here." What? He puts a tooth in my hand. I didn't know what to do. I called my department chair. I've got a tooth. Where is it? It's in my hand. Why is it in your hand? Because I didn't know what he was going to put. What do I do? Do I tell him, stick it under your pillow for the tooth fairy? Do they still believe in the tooth fairy? I didn't know. I mean, in high school, the only time someone loses a tooth is because someone punched them. I'm not used to that, so they scared me. 10 years old, that scares me. I don't teach the little ones anymore. So I do teach at the middle school. I currently teach at Ike Middle School in Roseville, California. That's about 20 minutes north of Sacramento, which is the capital. And the only way my principal ever lets me go to these, I have to tell you, we are the only IB middle school in the whole Placer County that's public. And what's special about that is all kids are required to take world language. That is a requirement. So in 6th grade we have level 1. In 7th grade we have level 2. And in 8th grade we have level 3. So our kids can enter on to each level, but then they could move on to level 4 as freshmen in high school. Now, I don't know, there might be other middle schools. I haven't met any other middle school teachers who have a level 3. Usually, and then in 8th grade, usually a split sometimes, level 1A, then level 1B. We do it because IB requires 50 hours of a language to be able to move on. And we're on trimesters, and one trimester doesn't have enough for 50 hours, so we can't even do the wheel. There's no way we can do it and still. We're kids going to. A lot of our kids do enter as freshmen level 4, which allows them to go much further in the language in high school. So here is where you can get the handout for the presentation. teachforjune.com/CIIA. All the presentations that I'm doing today are there. So the handout is there for everybody. And that's really weird why that happened. But we're going to talk about super verbs first. But I don't know why it looks that way. So the idea came from Terry Waltz. If you don't know Dr. Terry Waltz, she's an amazing woman. She teaches Mandarin and Spanish and is learning 6 or 7 languages simultaneously. She's just that amazing. And she came out, or at least told us about it, in the summer of 2013. And she's a translator as well as a teacher. And Mandarin is her first one that she did, and they have these concepts. Now, I don't speak Mandarin, and I can't understand the philosophical concepts, but there are these 7 concepts that translators have in Mandarin, and if you can express yourself in each of those 7 concepts, that you can pretty much express anything you want to express. So it was really a way of boiling everything down into some very simple words that you could teach kids soon, not necessarily the first day or the first week, and kids could actually communicate things beyond what's in the classroom. So she got this using his experience as a translator, and Terry discovered that the most complex ideas could be simplified into 7 basic concepts. Unless you're a Spanish teacher or a Mandarin teacher, You got them in 6 verbs. The rest of us have them in 7 because we differentiate in 2 areas where, like French and German, Italian do not differentiate. So one is location, to be at a place. And so in Spanish we have the verb estar for that, which is different from the verb is. So that's where that we differentiate. Or situation. Again, those are these lofty ideas. We simplify it with there is. And every language has a way to express that. Possession, to have something. So that we usually use the verb to have. Is. Something. Now this one, at least in Spanish, and well, German can kind of get around it, but to use the verb gefallen, I don't use gustar right away because what they learn first, they learn best, and they will conjugate the rest of the verbs that way. So I don't introduce, we call those backwards verbs. In German, they got the gefallen. In Spanish, you got gustar. French, you have it too, plaisir, but you can avoid it with aimer and use it completely different. So in German, we can use the gern and get away with it there, but avoid teaching it right away. Hold off on the likes for a while, at least in Spanish and German, if you're going to use those, because they'll start to conjugate those verbs all that way, and it sounds funny. Especially when they say things like me juega. So, motion, to go somewhere, so that's our verb to go. Volition, to want or feel like doing something. So to feel like is too big of an expression. We just simplify it to want. But they can't necessarily say I need something, but they don't need to say they need. They can express it with want. They don't have to. Once they master the top 6 or 7 verbs, then we can expand and start giving, now you know want, we can move to need. But we don't need that right away. They can go and you can drop them off in some country where they don't speak any English, and if they have these 6 or 7 verbs, they can express a lot of what they want to be able to say. They can't say I drive or I fly or I navigate, but they can say I go. And that's simple enough, and that gets the idea across. One of the big things I teach for my kids, especially in 8th grade, they're like, you want me to write an essay? I can't write one because they're thinking in their 8th grade brain and what their 8th grade English teachers require them to write. I'm like, no. You are like in your 1st grade year in language. I want you to write and I show them what an English 1st grade paper looks like. They go, we can get that. We can nail that. So they have these expectations that they have to be able to. I'm always telling them, find a different way to say it. Find a simpler way to say it. You can't say it with your 8th grade brain. You need to be able to say it with a 1st grade brain. So if students can really own these words, so you work on them, and again, it's not something, it's a unit. We're going to teach these 7 verbs and move on. It's something you work on throughout the year. Mike Pito, we're going to talk about him a little bit later on, he expanded this to the Sweet 16. That's their curriculum at their school for all 4 years, is those 16 verbs. That's it. You can add what else you want to it, but at every level, they have to know for that level. And level 2, those kinds of things, but for those verbs. That's what they're required to do at each level, so they can have common assessments based on those types of things. Can you imagine building your whole curriculum on 16 words? Everything else, add what you need to, but that's what you need. But they know it really, really well, and they can communicate with it. All words. With only a few additional words. They don't need a lot of other words to be able to communicate. I thought I knew everything. I went to Spain between high school and college, and I didn't know how to say anything because it was not an emphasis learning how to speak. But our kids can actually speak when they master these words. They can actually say things and not just the phrases that they memorize from the textbook. They can actually create their own sentences and put things together. So by owning them, we mean students can use them in present, past, and future. Did you know you can pass the AP test without the subjunctive? You can get a 4, and sometimes even a 5, and you can avoid those really complex verb things that we spend all this time trying to explain to kids. They just need to be able to speak and write in multiple times. The basic, present, past, and future. They can do really, really well with that. Doesn't mean we're not going to teach them the other things as well, but I really want to hone on these three. Let's be honest. I know my 8th graders, when I taught high school, they didn't know them either. They don't know the difference between present and past. Read their English essays. They mix them back and forth. They don't know. No, students cannot say everything in the way that they want to say it. But they can say wants instead of needs, or goes instead of walks or runs or drives or flies, or likes instead of loves or enjoys. And once they've mastered these words, we can add on other words. Something I learned from Jason Fritz, he got it from elementary school. He has a graveyard of words. Instead of a word wall, he's got a graveyard. He puts RIP, a gravestone, and writes a word. When it's been killed off, you cannot use that word anymore. And off to the side, he's got alternatives, synonyms. So for Spanish, like bonita, Spanish 1, they use that word over and over and over again. I'm sick of hearing it. You kill it off. They're not allowed to use it anymore. And you could put hermosa and linda and other words that are synonyms to get them to expand their vocabulary. So once you understand likes, and they can do that one without thinking about it, then kill it off and find other ways to be able to express the same thing. Something I rescue is circumlocution to teach them. As I remember when I did the AP test in high school, we did not learn the word for whale. But it was all over the AP test that year. Picture. Oh. Now, I major out there, it's horrible, but I didn't know how to say whale, so the best I could say was big fish. And I know it's not a fish, but I got my cross and got my point. So, kids, if I learned from Alina Filipescu, she has on the wall 4 points that say, in the target language, person, place, idea, or thing. And so when a kid doesn't know a word, instead of just giving her the word, she points. Is it a person? Is it a place? Is it an idea? Is it a thing? And she trains them to try to talk around the word and teaches them that we do it in English. We don't know what something is. It's new technology, for example, or something, or we forgot what a word is. We talk around the word. And it's a really good skill to teach kids. And the only way, you can't really teach it, you can only model it. So by doing it all of the time, and eventually she'll give them the real word, but she wants them to work around it to say, if you don't know that word, you don't have a dictionary everywhere, and you don't always have internet access to look up on Google Translate to figure out what it is. You have to rely on what you have. And so she teaches that. And I follow the same thing. I only have one dictionary in my classroom. My kids don't even know it exists. Because I don't want them to rely on that dictionary. I want them to be able to use the words that they know to be able to communicate the ideas that they want to be able to communicate. So we work on this circumlocution and the simplification a lot. Whenever they ask me how to say something, my first thing is, can you simplify that? Find a different way to say it in English and then work from those words. And usually they can figure it out from themselves at that point. And once these superverbs are mastered, students can add on other high-frequency verbs. So you can add on. I know in our level 1, we really focus on the top 100. So the frequency dictionary of, and fill in your language, it's in almost every language that we teach here in America, on Amazon, is an awesome book. If you're going to, don't even get your school to pay for it, because you want to take this book with you wherever you go. It's that good of a book. Depending on the language, it ranges between $30 to $60. I think some of the Arabic and more expensive. I don't know why. Just they make it more expensive. But what's great about them is they list words top in numeric order. So the Spanish one and the 1 to 5,000. The German 2,000. Then they also list them alphabetically. So if you want to find a word, you can see how common it is. Then they also group words together in the top verb kickers in German. spend your time on the top ones. Or I always teaching because I can abolish chapter 4 of level 1, which is that chapter. I can abolish that huge list of vocabulary because the top 20 words in food, almost none of them are in that chapter. Almost none of them. So you don't have to waste time teaching that. I have to teach out of a textbook. But I can go through and pick and eliminate words that are not, paperclip. It's right in the school chapter of every book. How often do you say it outside of school? And even in school, how often do you say it? I ask my kids the same question. How often do you say the word paperclip? Almost never. How about stapler? Almost never. But those are words you're supposed to teach from the school chapter. So they're not even useful. We had chapter 5, paso a paso, when I taught from that book. Columpio, swing set. Teeter-totter. In California, where I'm from, they don't have them anymore. They've outlawed them because of safety issues. And when I had to teach it, it was before YouTube, so I couldn't even tell the kids why that they weren't there. And my kids were 80% Asian. They didn't speak English as their first language, so they was always translating my English to Mandarin, going back and forth, so I couldn't even show them what a teeter-totter was and why it was banned, but they had to learn the vocabulary for it, where they didn't even have a concept of it, because they had a little artistic picture of it in the book, but it was a waste of time. So the book is really good for that. You can expand the words. 2, Spanish and French, not so much German and other languages, but Spanish really, because we've got 21 Spanish-speaking countries, and there's 21 different ways to say everything. And my old department chair, she's Mexican, so she is pro-Mexican for everything. She goes, I'll go Latina on you. She always wants to win those fights. And we argue about which word is more common. And no offense to Mexicans, but not always the Mexican word is the most common. It's most used outside of Mexico. In fact, Mexican version of Spanish is the furthest from standard Spanish that there is because of all the Native American dialects. And they say maybe within 100 or so years, it may actually branch off to a completely different language. I have a friend who's Dominican. He goes, I speak 3 languages. I speak English, I speak Spanish, I speak Mexican. Because it's different. And again, no offense, but I teach one for work. Well, it's actually undoubtedly more common than caminar. Caminar is popular in Mexico, but the further you get out of Mexico, it no longer is. It's a Mexican, but it's so we have that. That's how we decided our battles. Let's look for common. So it's a really great book to get. Frequency Dictionary of, and then languages. Mandarin. It might be Mandarin, because I don't know if Amazon publishers know that Chinese isn't a language. But they have all those, yeah?
I just looked on Amazon on that, and the Kindle version of the Spanish one is free right now on Amazon.
And second edition. I have the Kindle ones. I have the Kindle in Spanish, French, and German. Yeah, that's it. Okay. What's great about this book, if you really are that really boring person, no offense, but you really like to read all the research behind where they got all the words, they have like 30 pages explaining that. It's really dry. I believe them. The Kindle version.
Amazon?
Yeah, Amazon, because that's where Kindle is. Yes, that's the publisher. But what they did was they took literature and modern writing like newspapers, fiction and nonfiction, oral language, common oral language, rich common oral language, poor common oral language, movie language, all of that, and then put it through a computer to find the most common words. So it's not taken randomly. It's taken from words that are being used from a variety of sources. And so we use those words. It really is a good use of your money. I have it in French, German, and Spanish, and I have the digital versions plus the hard copies too. But they're awesome. So they have them listed both ways, which is good. If you're looking for a word to see how much, like banana is like over top 5,000. I'm not even going to bother teaching it. If they need to learn about banana, they'll learn it in context when they need to learn it. I'm not going to waste my time. I don't have the time to teach them I'm working on the top 200 to 300 is what I'm working on. Any questions or comments about the superverbs? Okay.
I have one question.
Yep. I don't know why they changed that.
You post, like some people will post the first person and then the third person, those are the most frequent? Or the first, like singulars only, and they'll post those?
I have them up on a verb wall, and I have them in past, present, and future of all 5 forms. And for Spanish and French, where we have the 2 past, I one going to be in the imperfect or the imperfect preterite, or the passé composé, that often. And when it is, I write it up on the board. So I do it the most common, but I have them all listed there in one big poster.
And then do you just point when
I point when I use them. He expanded on Terry's idea of the super 7, but 7 in Spanish, it's 6 in most other languages. Kind of which ones he's done. I use ones because I already made the posters and I don't want to spend the money to make them again. So he's kind of switched them because if you look on his website, he's got a couple different versions. He calls this his essential curriculum, and as I said, he used to teach in Southern California. He now moved back with his wife because his wife was working or teaching. I don't know if she's a teacher on the East Coast. So now instead of having the coastal relationship, now they're back together in one. But he called it his essential curriculum, that everybody in the department used that as their main curriculum. They could add whatever they wanted, but that was what they had to do. In level 1, they worked on the present and the past. In level 2, they worked on the past. Level 3, I know that the textbooks say throw everything else at them that they haven't already had, but that's not really practical. But he worked on like the future and other tenses like that. But the vocab was the same there, the root of it. And when they gave a common assessments, that's what they assessed on, those 16 verbs, to make sure that the kids really, really know those. And I know when I teach level 3, I use the Sweet 16 as well. I don't add any new vocabulary that they have to actually study and memorize. I don't teach it that way anyway, but I don't add any because I'm teaching them future and conditional and subjunctive. That's hard enough. So you can't usually throw them, which textbooks love to do, new vocab and new structure at the same time. That's too much cognitive overload. So use something familiar and add something new to it works a lot better. So he has based a 4-year high school curriculum on this essential curriculum as a solid foundation. And it is just that. They obviously teach more than those 16 verbs. And I have found, and that's why I love this using as a curriculum, textbooks on average have 100 vocabulary words per chapter. Depending on how aggressive your district is, you have to teach 12 to 15 chapters a year. So that's 1,500 vocabulary words a year. That's this. Then they only remember this because you spend the next year, the first 6 weeks, reviewing everything they were spoken for. Which in fact, I already learned Spanish 1. Why do I have to do this again? I made it Spanish 2. They convinced me to stay. I got to advance quicker in Spanish. I was like, that was a waste of my time, and I can't imagine a lot of other kids might feel the same way. Without me even trying. Because you can't teach language in isolation. So when I'm using the Sweet 16, that's 7, and I'm using those, I'm using other words, and I'm using them over and over again, not even consciously, just they come up over and over and over again. The kids learn a lot more. I had one kid, and I didn't realize they used tampoco, which is either or neither in Spanish. I didn't know I used it as much, but I do, because I'll say, is it this or this? And it's this. Is it this or this? It's neither. And so I would say, tampoco. I even raise my voice and do it funny. And so when the kids would say it, they'd be like, tampoco. And I'm like, where did you learn that word? We didn't even write it down. I don't remember. They go, you use it all the time. So they pick up those words. So when you really are laser focused on these Sweet 16, you are teaching them so much more. If you try to cover all of this, they're not going to be able to do it. They're only going to remember this. And then you're going to spend the next 6 weeks of the following year going and teaching them all that stuff over, which again, they're not going to remember. If they didn't remember it in a year, they're certainly not going to remember 1,500 vocabulary words in 6 weeks. So think about that. Here are the 9 additional verbs to make up the Sweet 16. Gives, says, does or makes, can or to be able to, puts, knows, and the one that he focuses on for the ones who have different ones is the knows a fact, not knows a person. Leaves, and you can pick whichever verb you think is the best one for that. There's different ways to say it in Spanish. I usually use salir as the one I use because they use salida as the exit for the word. So I can kill 2 birds with 1 stone that way. I know there's a slight difference between volver and regresar, but I always use volver because I tell them like revolve, it's only halfway around you go through there. And I had a kid, every time he goes, reach, regresa, because he liked that word better than volver. So this one you want to use, or which is common in the area you teach, of a version of Spanish that you know, or use the frequency dictionary to battle it out. Students can begin to express even more ideas than just with the. So now we're getting some of those more advanced ideas in there. Again, needs is still not in there. Cognate, but in it's a cognate. But again, they can express it with wants and leave it at that. And by just adding these 9 extra verbs, students can communicate a wide range of ideas relatively quickly. And again, this does not mean that your first 6 weeks you're trying to get them to memorize these 16 verbs. It is something that takes all year for them because you can throw them at them, but they're not going to master them. You have to use them in the classroom. They have to be exposed to them, and then they'll eventually start coming out towards the end of the year. It's a solid foundation for a curriculum can be based solely on these 16 verbs. And I know some of you are thinking, there's no way that I'm going to be able to pass that through my curriculum director. 16 verbs, really? For 4 years of a curriculum? But really, there's so much that you can do with those if you really focus. And if you really went through, if you have to teach from a textbook and you use the frequency dictionary, my rule kind of is my general rule because the average person uses about 1,800 vocabulary words to get through the day. 1,800. They know many more. So you might know what behoove means, but it never comes out of your mouth. So I say the top 2,000 words are those active words that they should eventually know. Anything over 2,000, I call literary. They're the passive vocabulary. They should recognize them in reading if they come up. Advanced, not in level 1, obviously. But I'm not going to actively teach those. And anything over 5,000, I'm not going to bother at all. So I go through my book and I go, 344, no, not a high priority. 1,400, not a high priority. I'm going to eliminate a lot of those so I can get it down to actual reasonable amounts of vocabulary. Because they just can't memorize all that vocabulary. And how many of you, of your parents, or are you parents, took your kid to the vegetable section of the produce and that's down? We don't do that to teach words as come up with the kid's experience. That's what we should really do. because I don't even know what half those vegetables are in English, let alone in any other language. I tried once. I took the book, chapter level 1, and asked him if he could point out some of these vegetables that were requiring my kids to know. He didn't know what some of them were. So I'm like, if the expert doesn't even know what they are, then why are we teaching them? And how many kids, I love asparagus and Brussels sprouts, but how many kids like them? So they're not going to really focus on learning that word. Vocabulary is needed to keep. So that's where you personalize, because my curriculum is my. So I use those 16 as the basis, but from year to year, everything else changes based on the population of kids that are in my room. I had one teacher I know, she teaches in Wisconsin, and hunting and fishing vocabulary comes up all the time because that's what her kids do. Okay, I teach in the suburbs of the capital of California. Although we get rural really quick, because we're like in the farming area, so we can go really quick, we still don't have a lot of hunters and fishermen. So that kind of vocabulary, hook, line, fish, not going to come up in my thing. Scootering, skateboarding, going to the movies, those kind of typical suburb kind of things are what comes up. But sometimes I had kids who play football in class, and other times I didn't get those kids this year. So then football doesn't come up, that vocabulary doesn't come up that year. So that's where it differentiates each year, is what kids want to talk about. And there's not a way that I can talk about anything a kid wants to talk about without using those Sweet 16. They're such high-frequency words, you can't avoid using them. Yes?
Can you maybe give us like one or two sentences that we could use for like curriculum mapping? You know, my district wants us to say, you know, in this level or this semester, students will be able to. And if it's all centered around their interests, it's kind of hard to guarantee that they will know these things, so they will be able to learn these things.
Well, what I usually do when my district, I'm lucky that we don't have that, but when I used to have to do that, I would put down like the top 5 sports that kids like. Football, basketball, baseball, soccer, hockey. Okay? So I put those down. Now, if I didn't have a football player in the room, oh, you play football? You don't play football. You play basketball. Oh, does she play football or does she play basketball? I use it as my alternate to throw it in there. I never teach the common hair colors. They are so boring. So I won't accept that as an answer, but I use them as my alternative to do that, to get those ones in there. Because it gets really boring to say, oh, he's got brown hair, got blonde hair, gray, bald, as my kids like. They learn that word really quick with me. So my team, it's got polka dots, or does it have brown hair? So I use those as the alternatives to get those, that required curriculum that your curriculum mapper wants in there. That's where I'll kind of put that of a footballer in the classroom. And if I have, say, it's just, where all the AP kids are there, they all got targeted into your class because it just works that way, and none of them that year play football. They're more baseballers that year. So I can talk about football all day long, but I lost them.
So do you ever write it more generally, like students will learn about leisure activities?
I don't write it like that. I say students will, like, my 5 standards I use are off ACTFL. So students will engage in conversations. Students will understand spoken language. Students will understand and discuss. Understand and discuss written language. Students will compare and contrast. For my class, it's Hispanic culture with that of their own. So I write mine very generically. I used to do it very specifically, and it really it doesn't have as much of an impact, and it's so finite, and it's so limiting in what they can do. I want my kids to be able to talk about anything. On the bus, in Spain, they might not get to that little islet. They can talk about their likes and their dislikes. They may never get there. I'll tell you, Europe last year, I'm not going to go political, but every time I met someone, they said, how could you voted for him? For the president. Every single person, every Uber driver, every taxi, every store I went to in France and in Spain, they asked me that over and over again. We don't even teach that in the school because we can't. We can't show our preferences for that kind of thing. But I want to teach them generic enough language that they could actually communicate that out there. I had a friend, I was kind of embarrassed, thought we were going to get in trouble. She had a shirt in 13 languages that said, "I'm sorry for our president," in 13 languages. And she proudly, when we traveled to the airport, she wore that. Every time we traveled somewhere, got on the train, she put that shirt on every single time. And she would just point. And I did the Agen workshop last year, which is a great thing if you can do. And the mayor comes and does a big soiree for us, introduced us there, and he made some pot shots at our president, and she just points at her shirt. Je suis désolé pour notre président. So it was kind of funny. So I make mine more generic, if I can possibly get away with it. And we can at my district, so you have to kind of work. And just, what I always say is, do what's best for kids. Do what you have to do to keep your job, but advocate for kids. Say, this is really too laser focused. And because if we focus only on this, they can't do all of this stuff. If I broaden a little bit, then I can get more done, my kids will be more successful, and I can actually teach them for the real world. So do what you have to keep your job, but advocate for kids. And if you educate your administrators, they usually will they'll usually come up. A lot of our language, they don't know what we do. They have no clue what we do. And no offense to administrators, they've got so many hats. They might have been an English teacher or a math teacher. Now they've got to be an expert in all the disciplines. It's about that before we continue the section. Oh, yes. That students can engage in conversation. They can listen and understand and discuss spoken language. Understand and discuss written language. They can compare and contrast Hispanic culture with their own. There's another one I'm missing. I do specify when we go novel, I do say they can understand, discuss the novel versus just written language when we do an actual novel. They can summarize Hispanic culture is another one that we do. And that pretty much covers. My kids always are like, ours never change. Because I work on one per day. Because we really cover them all the time. But I want them to focus on one because if they ever come in for accreditation, and we're IB, so IB is coming next year to accreditate us, they're going to ask them, what are you learning today? They're going to say, oh, we're engaging in conversations today. So they can actually regurgitate it in words. There's the poster. I also laminate them, and I have a poster. They're on my website, teachforjune.com/resources. I have them. You can print them out with the little targets, and I laminate them, and I have magnets on the back, and they stick right here, and I can change them out. But the kids go, every Monday it's engaging. Yeah, because that's when we have conversations. Monday's my conversation day. We talk. I don't know why they changed all my fonts here. So we're going to talk about, this one is how to use them in the classroom. So the beauty of teaching a small set of vocabulary is the students retain that so much more. So we talked about that. They don't just get this, they get a whole lot more. When you try to teach too much, students retain very little. But when you focus on a small core, it more. Because it just got stuck in their heads. When you tell them you have to know these 30 words, they freak out. And they try to learn it the old-fashioned way. And with memorization on vocabulary cards, the moment the vocabulary starts to go out unless you use it all the time. It's like a hamster wheel. Once the hamster gets off the wheel doesn't turn anymore. And that's old-fashioned, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't make logical sense, but I see it in the classroom. Less actually is more. And until it actually happens, you're not going to believe me. You're going to conceptualize it, but you're not going to believe me. You're going to go back to the classroom. You're going to try to teach that 1,500 vocabulary words. But try it and see what happens. Verbs vocabulary list. That's never worked before. It's not going to work now. English teachers have been trying it for years. The kids memorize the vocab for the test, and then it's gone after the test. It's the same thing that happens with us. I haven't given a vocabulary test in over a decade. Memorization is not acquisition. Memorization is learning. And you know, people say, I can't learn a language. I say, you're right, you can't. Not a single human being on this planet has ever learned a language. But almost everyone, unless you have a traumatic brain injury or defect, has acquired a language. Because parents, we know how to teach language. Because our kids speak languages. And we never, not once, gave them, when they're born, you know, the baby shower, you don't get tons of dictionaries and grammar books to give to your infants. You don't say, I found this really great vocab list on food. You might want to try it. It really works really well. They'll master that vocabulary real quick. We don't do that. So we don't want to focus on learning. Language class is not like any other class. In California, they actually link it with performance arts. When I started teaching, I'm like, we are not a performing art. What are you thinking? But when I think about it more and more, that is what we are. You cannot learn to play the violin from a book. You cannot learn to play a sport from a book. Can you imagine giving your football team the playbook and the rule book and say, I'll see you on Friday night underneath the lights? They'd suck. And what do we do to our kids? We give them a textbook of vocabulary, grammar rules. We'll see you on Friday for the test. And what do? They suck. So we are like a performing art or a sport where you actually have to get dirty and get into it to actually learn it, to acquire it. Learning is short term. Acquisition is forever. When you've acquired something, it's stuck with you. And we move on whether they got it or not. And we lose 30%. Another chapter, 30% kids. The grain mastery. So next 2 weeks, then we're moving on. It is we work on over and over and over for every year of our curriculum. It teaches them naturally in the classroom. Don't focus on them. You can't avoid them. If you're speaking in the target language, those words are really common. It's really hard to actually actively avoid them. Every day. Point and pause. When you use them, I have them as posters. If you don't have them posters, have them written down. Point to them as you use them. When I write them down, I do not write them in order. My kids don't know what first, second, and third person is anyway, so I don't write them in order. I usually write the you form first because I'm usually asking them a question. Then I usually write the I form underneath that because I want them to respond to that. It is important to have the Sweet 16 on large posters. And I think you can buy some on Teacher's Discovery. They have some too. Every time you use one of the Sweet 16, point to it on the wall and pause. I am not only an oral learner, I'm a visual learner. I can hear, even names, I can hear it and recognize it, but until I see it written out, I can't be my own. And your kids are like that too. So point and pause to it every time so that your kids can associate the sounds with the letters, especially for French teachers. And no offense to you French teachers, but why do you bother with the alphabet in the first place? I mean, C, R, F, and L are the only letters that can't be silent, and you can string like 6 silent letters together, and the French, the Parisians go, but you can hear the difference. No, je parle and il parle sound the same to me, although the endings are different. But they say you can hear the difference. I don't believe them. Pointing attaches a visual to the sound. And so for the non-phonetic languages, it's really important for them to be able to see what it looks like. Especially languages that don't have the same alphabet, Latin-based alphabet. Pausing allows slow processors processing time. They need time to be able to process, to have a moment to rest. Regular use of the posters will ingrain the Sweet 16 into students' heads. I leave them up for tests and everything else. I don't cover them up. In the beginning of the year, they're looking at them a lot. by the middle of the year, they're not looking at them as much. They know them. Use 6 every day. Find ways to use them. As you ask scaffolded, differentiated questions, those are your questions. And they're, oh, this kid is a slow processor, so I'm not going anything but a yes or no question. Because they can't handle anything more. But this child can ask open-ended questions, so I'm going to ask them open-ended questions. I'm not going to bore them with the yes or no question. Differentiated instruction. Teens as naturally possible. If we're talking, oh, where did you go this weekend? You went to the mall. Oh, how did you go to the mall? Oh, I went to the mall. Or my mom, how else can you go to the mall? We can have kids raise their hand. I can go on my bike because I live across the street, or I take the bus. We can talk about different ways. I find ways. I'm looking at my posters and finding questions that I can ask using those words. This adds a little more interest to your questioning. It's not always the same types of questions you're asking. And it gives you an excuse to work in these verbs in as natural a way as possible. Michael's favorite beverage is Dr. Pepper. Where can Michael drink Dr. Pepper? When you go out on a date, do you drink Dr. Pepper? What are you doing when you most want a Dr. Pepper? Who gives you Dr. Pepper? Who knows that Dr. Pepper is your favorite drink? What do you do when you see a nice cold Dr. Pepper? Is there Dr. Pepper in your backpack? Where is your Dr. Pepper? So we have all these different ways. We're talking about Dr. Pepper. That was what I started my Spanish series, what your favorite drink was. You don't think you get much use out of that? Oh boy, 6 weeks. That's all we did was talk about everybody's favorite drinks. Kids got nicknames based on their drink. I have a kid nicknamed Apple Juice because his favorite drink was apple juice. We found an almond milk. I'm like, I don't know how you can get milk out of an almond. It's the driest nut of them all. But there's a girl who she brought a little cardboard thing of almond milk every day. Where do you go to get a Dr. Pepper? Do your friends like Dr. Pepper? Do you want a Dr. Pepper right now? They have them in the coolers out there. Does anyone, they're all going to be taken at lunch. Does anyone have a Dr. Pepper? This is my most common drink the kids liked was Dr. Pepper. But I like water. I'm like, you're a teenager. That's your favorite drink is plain water? I'm like, you're bored. And I like, do you buy water, flavored water, or the dirty water from the sink? They all learned agua sucia. They learned it because we use it all the time. And they sucia. Do you want a Dr. Pepper? When you buy Dr. Pepper, where do you put it? I had a kid who was not allowed to drink soda, but he stuck it. So it was a secret problem. Like, I'm going to tell your mom that you have that Dr. Pepper in your backpack. He's like, no. Tell her I was misbehaving, but don't tell her that. So as you do this over and over again, over the course of the year, your students will become naturally proficient at these high-frequency verbs. You see, I didn't add much vocabulary by asking those questions. We stuck with the same theme, but I went through all 16 verbs. And you can't do it with every sentence, but I look through my verbs on my wall and see which ones I can ask. Find ways to incorporate the Sweet 16 into class readings. Whenever possible, include these verbs in all your class readings. So when I'm writing, I'm usually writing something about my students. I teach 6 classes out of 7, and I don't want to write 6 different versions of stories, so I write one story with a couple kids from each class. So I always say, My classes are like a big family. We just can't eat dinner all at the same time. So my kids know what happens in other classes, the funny stories. We just treat it that way. So when I write stories, I write one story that includes kids from all the different ones. So that way I don't have to. Less work. Save time. We don't get paid the big bucks. Have a checklist of the verbs as you write your class stories for your students to read. I have a little sticky memo with them written there, and it's taped to my desk with tape all over it so it can't be peeled off, and I can see it there at all times. Keep a checklist close to wherever you teach. So I have one also at my front table where I teach from, so I can always look down and see, so I don't have to look away from the kids at my wall. I can look down at my table, I can see them. And as you co-create class stories, because I do a lot of class stories with my kids, not so much in level 3, morally discussions about things, whatever they want to talk about. But as I co-create stories, I'm cognizant of the Sweet 16 and try to incorporate them whenever possible. So as we're coming up with stories, I'm thinking, how can I work this verb in somewhere in the sentence? This includes when you co-create written stories with your students. I like to model how to write stories with my kids. It's how I cross-curricular teach, because I can say, look, we're introducing a character. You notice that? You do that in English. We are about to it's called a conflict. So I walk them through the writing, thinking about these verbs I want to get included in there. Assign individual words to students. So have students keep track of the number of times you use my 16 most ADHD kids, I call them boys, and I assign them a word. And I have a clicker. And they click every time. It helps me, but when they're focusing on that one word, they have to focus on everything. And they do, so they're click, 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 click. And I don't really care about the number. It does. I look and I go, ooh, I only got 14, really? I don't care how accurate they are, but I go, ooh, I didn't hit that word enough, I need to hit it next time. So it helps me, and I tell them, can you help me out here? I need you to listen for this word. And they usually say yes, and they like to have the clicker, so it helps both ways for us. This can be a simple hash mark on a sticky note or a fancy counter. I got 6 counters from Amazon all at once. I bought a couple sets of those. Use this as a teaching tool for you. It's not meant for them, but it does help. It's usually the ADHD kids that I usually give it to first choice. You can easily see which verbs you hit often and which ones need more repetitions. You haven't hit that one. Or, God, I thought I hit is really hard today. And you got it once. This is a great job for students who have difficulty staying focused. I use also some of my slower processors, because they can listen for the key words, because they get lost a little more often, so their mind will wander. Questions? I think, we're 1 minute over, but we're finished. Any questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you so much. I think we're at our keynote. Is it our keynote time now?